Despite adultery or zina being defined as haram, that is forbidden within Islam, the oldest profession has a long history within Islamic societies, including gay, and there's so many words in this I can't say. It begins with a T and ends in utes. Historically, Eon has played an important role in many societies which were to become Muslim, such as Egypt, Tunisia, where it's still legal, Mali, Mesopotamia, Malaysia and Indonesia. There is little evidence that the profession disappeared with the coming of Islam, nor was even disrupted. Pasion in India is often associated with temple peon, sometimes with female girls and boys being dedicated to a deity such as Yella Ama, and offered to visitors to the temple. This brought in both regulations and taxation by the state. Such practices still exist within parts of India. Sir Richard Burton, 1821 to 1890, was a British explorer, writer, Orientalist, scholar and soldier, something of a hero of mine. Burton enlisted in the the Army of the East India Company, and was posted to the 18th Bombay Infantry based in Gujarat under the command of General Sir James Napier, best remembered for his campaign to stop the practice of sati. Burton wrote plainly about the, and I don't think I can say this, brothels in India frequented by British soldiers and what is now Pakistan, especially Karachi. These became almost exclusively gay. Indeed, Burton theorised about the existence of a sotodatic zone that exists in geographical climate zone, in which sodomy and pedestry, sexual intimacy between older men and young pubescent adolescent boys, are endemic, prevalent, and celebrated amongst the indigenous inhabitants within their cultures. Although this included both North and South America, Spain, Italy, Greece, Japan and China, it's striking how it includes much of the Islamic world, with the omission of Saudi Arabia and Iran. And nevertheless, he does describe the prevalence of homosexuality in Persia. Youths arrived at puberty in Persia find none of the facilities with which Europeans supplies fornication. Onanism, or masturbation, is to a certain extent discouraged by circumcision, and meddling with the father's slave girls and concubines would be risking cruel punishment if not death. Hence they, boy and men, use each other by turns. This theory was not widely adopted. It may have confirmed the opinion of many British that homosexuality was essentially a foreign vice, regardless of the perception of foreigners about the British. Humorous though this may be, it is a reminder not to judge others, especially in the past, by the moral compass that we have become accustomed to. Interpretations of Al-Quran and Hadith allow only within marriage, nikah, and what is the right hand's owns. Historically, this permitted men to have extramarital with concubines and with slaves. Acts of homosexual intercourse are prohibited, although Muhammad, the main prophet of Islam, never forbade non-sexual relationships. But Islam has a long tradition of pragmatism with respect to education for those who have reached puberty, with being readily discussed and not subject of or taboo, as long as the topics under discussion were permissible. Before the abolition of slavery, concubinage existed alongside marriage as a permitted relationship in Islamic law that allowed man to have intercourse with his female slaves. Concubinage, which was an sexual relationship between a Muslim man and an unmarried female slave whom he owned, was the only legal sexual relationship outside of marriage within Sharia. Concubine, Sharia, refers to the female slave, Jariya, whether a Muslim or non-Muslim, with whom her master engages in intercourse. Concubinage was a pre-Islamic custom that was allowed to be practiced under Islam through some reform with Jews and non-Muslim people. Muhammad also inspired to free converted pious concubines and married them. Islamic jurisprudence sets limits on the master's right to intercourse with his female slave. A man's ownership of an unmarried slave girl gave him an exclusive right to have relations with her, under the condition that he could not sell her to others, in order to prevent peon of slaves and neither harm her. A man could own a limited number of concubines that he could afford and maintain their upkeep, but he could not access to have two slave girls owned by his wife. Furthermore, like a wife, a concubine had a right to be serviced by her master on a weekly basis. Marriage between the master and his concubine was only possible if she was granted free status first. To avoid pregnancies, the master had the right to practice coitus interruptus. The birth of progeny would change the legal status of the concubine to that of al-Walad, mother of the child. As such, the concubine could not then be sold, and a child would be seen as legitimate and free. On the lawful death of her master, she would automatically acquire free status. In the Barbary states, concubines were captive slaves, sometimes acquired via the Barbary slave trade from Europe. Shocking though this may seem, and it's certainly used by those wishing to criticise Islam, it's remarkably more enlightened than practices described in the Bible. Harem refers to the domestic spaces that are reserved for women of the house in a Muslim family, although the practice is neither exclusive to nor originating within Islam. A harem may house a man's wife or wives, their prepubescent male children, unmarried daughters, female domestic servants, and other unmarried female relatives. In the past, harems also housed enslaved concubines. Nevertheless, the harem system first became fully institutionalized in the Islamic world under the Abbaside Caliphate. Many parts of Islamic law define what is today called, and I don't think I can say this, begins with an R, ends with an E, as a coercive form of fornication or adultery or zina. Coercive zina means that all the normal legal principles that pertain to zina, its definition, punishment and establishment through evidence, were also applicable to all Sunni Muslim jurists agree that A is haram, prohibited, based on the Hadith of Muhammad. But according to 12 Shia Muslim jurists, A is considered makruh, strongly disliked, but is permissible with the consent of the wife. Sodomy falls under the same category as S between an unmarried man and a woman. Male-male intercourse is referred to as liwat, while female-female intercourse is referred to as shiak. Both are considered reprehensible acts, but there is no consensus on the punishment for either. Nevertheless, according to Islamic tradition, gender roles can be divided into the following groups: male, female, kunza, mukanis, binary transgender, and mukanas, non-binary transgender. In Islamic literature, the plural term for mukanatun was a term used to describe gender-variant people and refers to a person who behaves like a woman in gentleness, speech, appearance, movement, and so on. The mukanataf is to be distinguished from both the kunataf, which is inter-S, and the eunuch castrated, with any form of castration strongly forbidden in Islam. Furthermore, there is no single verse in Al-Quran prohibiting homosexuality, especially between men. According to some hadiths, the penalty for peon in Islam is 100 lashes for the adulterer or adulteress, Whilst if a married man or woman, married or unmarried, is practising peon, the punishment amounts to death by throwing stones. Despite the severity and indeed shocking brutality of the punishments, Islam has established laws that make the practice of punishment against perpetrators of peon extremely difficult. Thus it is required to punish the practitioners of peon unless they personally confess, or that there are 4 witnesses who have witnessed the act of having S, provided that the adulteress has a clear view beyond doubt, provided that his part of his penis, the glans or more, is absent from the adulteress's vena, and none of the 4 witnesses retract his testimony. Otherwise, the remaining 3 or less will become guilty. On charges of slandering the man or woman, the punishment for slander is imposed upon them. According to some hadiths, they also impose strict punishments on those who accuse women of engaging in peon without conclusive evidence, namely 4 witnesses. Furthermore, Al-Quran states, "But force not your maids to peon when they desire chastity." Thus forcing girls into peon is prohibited, and not peon itself, whatever so many Muslims claim, often quite forcibly. Indeed, during the Prophet's time, Putes used to walk the streets, and the Prophet did not punish any of them. Despite this historic fact, it's often repeated by Muslims that Muhammad said there was no peon within Islam. Qiyan were a social class of women trained as entertainers, which existed in the pre-modern Islamic world. The term has been used for women who were both free, including some whom came from nobility, and non-free women. Historically, the Qiyan flourished under the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, and in Al-Andalus. Like other enslaved women in the Islamic world, Qiyan were legally sexually available to their owners. While some probably did not work as putes, others worked in Qiyan houses, which served as brothels. The imperial harem of the Ottoman Sultan, also called Sarajevo in the west, was part of the Topkapi Palace. It housed the Valide Sultan as well as the Sultan's daughters and other female relatives. Eunuchs and enslaved girls were also part of the harem. During the latter periods, the sons of the Sultan lived in the harem until they were 12 years old. Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520 to 1566, legalised peon, according to a fatwa issued by his state mufti, Abu al-Saud Effendi, in 1531, following Mehmed al-Fatih, 1448 to 1481, in abolishing the punishment of sodomy in the late period of the reign of Abdul Majid I, 1821 to 1861, who ordered the opening of brothels and homosexual acts without any penalty. The peon was prevalent in the Ottoman Empire, with both men and women, as well as Christian Jews and Muslims, engaging in the practice. Clients met petuts in various locations, including coffee houses, inns for bachelors known as bachelor rooms, laundries, restaurants, barbershops, and candy stores. Putes often served sailors and military members, particularly in their lodgings. Additionally, putes served clients in their private homes, abandoned buildings, and taverns. In early modern Istanbul, evidence suggests that some women worked alone to find clients in public areas at night, while others worked together to bring clients to rooms they rented. They avoided attracting attention. Some female putes disguised themselves as men and certain pimps married their putes to remain under the radar. The legal approach to female putian during the Ottoman period was thus rather less straightforward. In fact, there is little evidence that putes and their clients were lashed or stoned to death, with putian seen as a social problem rather than an essial transgression. And the concern is for public order and the possibility of exploitation. Ottoman Sharia courts did not pay attention to prosecuting zina, as we would expect given the near impossibility of proof. Neither did they zealously apply the punishments for procuring and soliciting prescribed by fatwas and kununame. Putian was most often appeared in court records where the residents of a neighbourhood petitioned to have a pute or pimp neighbour expelled. These undesirable neighbours were usually running small, often family-based operations in their homes. The courts were sympathetic to such requests, and putes and pimps were regularly banished. Ottoman subjects enjoyed a broad right to enforce standards of conduct in general, as well as pure. Residents could object to various types of misbehaviour. Most male putes were registered with the state, and they often worked in public bathhouses. Same-sex relationships were considered inappropriate, but in practice were considered less immoral than adulterous relationships between men and women, with female putes. Accordingly, some jurists excluded same-sex relationships from punishment. The government only interfered with male putian in cases of male-on-male, and I can't say the word again, begins with an R, ends with an E. To Burton and his Sotadic zone, I will consider practices within the subcontinent and Afghanistan, although there is often a commonality within the Middle East. Across the subcontinent, regardless of religion, crimes against women are particularly high, reflecting a misogynistic culture. Although it's tempting to see this as reflecting the backward culture of rural and remote areas, the highest rates of reported crime are in the most urbanised areas, including Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal and Maharashtra. In Bangladesh, 90% of women and girls aged between 10 and 18 have experienced sexual harassment or violence and unwanted physical contact in streets, markets, public transport and public areas. A similar picture emerges in Pakistan, and the treatment of women is all too well documented within Afghanistan. Indeed, British grooming gangs really reflect what is common practice, especially in the Punjab, with abuse widespread in Pakistani schools. In a study of child abuse in rural Pindi and Islamabad, 17% claimed to have been abused, and in 1977, one child a day was reported as being gang-ard, or kidnapped for sexual gratification. Whilst the reporting of male R is far less common than for females, over 2/3 of males report being harassed or actually assaulted, generally when they were below the age of 18. Male putes, mostly under 25 and often quite young, operate their business in every city and major town in Pakistan. Clients of male youths come from every class, age group, profession, and indeed professed sexual orientation. Bachabazi is child R, still commonly practiced in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It commonly only involves a boy dancing whilst wearing women clothes. The boy playfully caresses the man he is dancing for. It is also common that force is used to make the boy do things he doesn't want to do. Security officials state that they're unable to end such practices because many of the men involved in Bazi-related activities are powerful and well-armed warlords. Maybe related to this, but it's not uncommon to see Taliban fighters and politicians wearing women's shoes with heels. When I lived in Saudi Arabia in the 1980s, peon did exist. Somali ladies would knock on our doors asking if we had any washing. I've no idea if they were completely independent or organised. Whilst my Thai office boy was deported for selling himself, he told me about other Thais who rented out their wives. But what was most shocking during my time were the practices surrounding camel racing. Young boys from Pakistan were strapped onto camels, clinging on for their dear lives. Shocking though this was. Following the race, the Saudi race organisers, camel owners and racegoers would then bid for the jockey, reminiscent of the Bazi tradition from further east. I understand that now robot jockeys are used, changing the practice in Saudi and the Gulf. But of course, Dubai is one of the world's major centres for peon, and indeed the exploitation of influencers. Across the Arab world, virginity for females is considered as defined as an intact hymen. This leads to premarital A being common across Arab countries. In Iran, there are believed to be millions of women engaged in peon, with the average age having dropped from 18 to 12. This reflects the prevalence of temporary marriages, muta, being common in Iran, with males often seeking young girls. Although, as in all branches of Islam, relations with prepubescent girls is haram, but this is not always recognised in some cultures, as is the case in some non-Islamic cultures, as is also the case in some non-Islamic cultures. The death penalty can be imposed for peon in Iran if women in question is married. The client may also be executed. Shia men from Dubai, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates and Iraq make pilgrimage to Iran, enjoying the landscape, the sights and the women who can be had for as little as 6 cents due to the sanctions and economic crisis. I've avoided discussing the horrific treatment of LGBTQ and indeed Yazidis under the Islamic State, as it should be apparent that I do not consider their actions to have any justification within Islam. Yes, a controversial view, and one that I am regularly called to defend, but not here. But this brings me to my main point, that it is the full range of sexual practices and abuse of power are found in Islamic societies, just as they are within other religions. There is nothing unique within Al-Quran which promotes such deviance, whatever we are being encouraged to believe, nor are such issues exclusive to Islamic societies. For example, in terms of women's rights, the Central African Republic, Sierra Leone, Democratic Republic of Congo, and South Sudan have similar repressive legal codes as some Muslim countries, while South Africa, Brazil, Russia and Mexico are considered the least safe countries for women. Many African countries have equally illiberal attitudes to LGBTQ issues, as some Islamic. Furthermore, Latin America, South America, the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe and parts of Southeast Asia, including Singapore, are somewhat repressive. Turning to children, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Cameroon and the Central African Republic are very unsafe. In terms of child abuse, South Africa, India, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Russia, the UK, the US and Australia join Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is no way an attempt to excuse the abuse of power and exploitation, but simply to suggest that it's not exclusive to Islam. Indeed, it's my belief that the more we attempt to suppress what is natural, the more deviant and perverse man's secret behaviour becomes. As a final comment, you will probably be aware that Indonesia, where I live, are supposedly making zina illegal, with somewhat less evidence required than under Sharia. Why I find it so divisive is that it will certainly not banish zina, peon, nor even homosexuality from Indonesia. The common people will be punished, while the rich and powerful will find mechanisms to avoid being caught. Indeed, new businesses will emerge which service the needs of the rich and powerful, whilst zina is publicly condemned, including, or maybe especially, by those using these services. During Indonesia's new order, peon was suppressed, with the army rounding up street peas and placing them in their own brothels. The rationale was to service soldiers away from home, but undoubtedly they provided additional sources of revenue for generals. I am always mindful that this is exactly what happens when such activities are attacked.